over to the whatever side you're supposed to move your tasks because you're graduating today. So that is outstanding news. However, between now and then, we got some ground to cover. So the last sessions we've had, and I know we've slowly expanded the population of the group, which is a phenomenal thing to see. We started off with our discussion on leadership and management, and we had a good group then. But we then migrated to the operations subject, where I know there's still much work to be had on all the Benning processes and tools, or processi, whatever that word might be. And then to our last session, which was all about communicating better and how do we create great teamwork, and most importantly, drive great customer service. And customer service, as we said, is not exclusive to you and say Publix or you and whatever customer that might be. It could also be internal customers, how we treat and respect and, more importantly, work together as one Benning unit. Well, which brings us to this session, which is all about management. You might say, well, wait, Greg, we covered management in the first session, leadership and management. This is two very specific elements of management. One, finance. So we're going to create everyone to be junior Aldens today. We're all going to put our accounting hats on. Everyone's like, well, wait, I didn't know that was for what we're signing up for. Actually, the finance subject we're going to cover is a little bit different than the way some of you may have either learned it. It's not that it's different in the sense that I'm teaching you accounting, but a lot of this you could apply even to your own life. So I am not an accountant. In some cases, people would say, Greg, why are you even qualified to teach this particular subject? One of the things that I want to impart upon everybody as we go through this finance subject is how important operations is to finance, and putting a little knowledge in everyone's head to where you could apply it even to when you're buying a house, to how you manage your own finances, to when you look at the stock market, what does that even mean? And I realize everyone in here, some of you may have this mastered, you could teach the course. However, we want to kind of see what are those right benchmarks, and more importantly, turn that finance kind of switch on in a lot of your heads. And then lastly, because time is money, we're going to talk about time management, the other element. And time management is actually probably should be retitled to time mismanagement, because we don't manage time, folks. You manage activities. That clock, well, there's no clock, so I feel like we're in Vegas. You know how many clocks in Vegas? Well, the idea, we don't get to determine how many more hours we put in the day. In fact, it's how we use the hours that we're given. And do we effectively plan? Yeah, we're going right back to planning again. So we're going to talk about all things related to good time management. And there's a book, once again, I sound like the Barnes & Noble Oprah Book Club here. If you like to read, it's called Getting Things Done, GTD. It's actually a system, because if you can make it a system, you can make a lot of money. Getting Things Done is by an author named David Allen, not David Allen Coe. I think that's a country singer. But David Allen wrote this book, and a lot of the tips and suggestions are things that I'm going to reference. I'm also going to show you Outlook. A lot of you probably have Outlook either on your computer, your tablet, or in some form or fashion. I'm not a Microsoft salesman. I don't care what you have on your phone per se, but I'm going to show you ways to maximize and make yourself more efficient. If you can take one or two of those ideas and apply them, heck, even using a dry erase board in your trailer or office, you would be able to implement these things. And then we're going to wrap up with what I call life management. So obviously time, I realize we all wear the Benning green, but most of you in here have other things going on in your life. Who in here is married? Raise your hand. Who in here has kids? Who has hobbies? All the people with hobbies kind of do this, and families. Some of you may be in school. Some of you may be active in your church. The simple fact is you are betting for a portion of your day. Whatever that is, we don't necessarily say, well, we're here 8 to 5 necessarily. Some of us, we got our cell phones, they go off, maybe all times of the night or morning or whatever. Simple fact is, as we're going through our life, if your child today called up and says, hey, I'm sick, you come get me out of school or something like that, you got to change your day. Things get shifted around. The point is, life management is also not only how you manage those day-to-day activities, but what do you all want to be when you grow up? I know that sounds weird to tell a group of adults, what do you want to be when you grow up? But folks, as the great John Wooden, so a lot of you may remember John Wooden was the coach of UCLA. I think he lived to like 98 or 99 years old. He won, I think, 13 or 14 national championships at UCLA for UCLA basketball. Amazing coach. But one of the things that he was famous for, and I'm going to absolutely mangle this famous quote, because that's what I'm good at. He said, if you're not growing, you're dying. And I don't care how old some of you are, it doesn't matter. You need to have aspirations, goals, and targets. And we'll talk about that today as well. But this first subject I find particularly fun. It's all about finance. How many of you here like money? Come on now. Hopefully most of us like money in some form or fashion. I don't mean being greedy, but obviously understanding money, how it works. I'm an engineer by degree, so if anything else, it wasn't until later in my career that I got exposed to all things finance. Some of you may deal with finance all day long, so you have a different respect or interpretation of it. So when we go through today, it was interesting for me to put this together, looking at it from what I would call the non-financial lens. So that's what I like about this section. It's financial management for non-financial managers. For instance, if I brought Alden in here, he would give you kind of the accountant's version. Why not? He's the accountant. But we're going to be looking at it from how we apply this. So here's our today. Obviously got a lot to cover. Let's start off with, what are the financial habits of great contractors? Behaviors, processes. Let's talk about this together. What do you think those financial habits are of great performing companies?
Gotta make money.
Gotta make money, absolutely. We are a for-profit business. We're not a not-for-profit, so to keep the doors open, we need to be doing cash-generating activities. Notice the word I chose there, cash-generating activities. One of the big things that I am going to pound on today over and over and over, if you remember nothing else, remember this: cash is king. Bar none. Cash is king, folks. For instance, if I said, here, I have $20. I will give you $20 or say I owe you $20. Which would you rather have? Absolutely. Cough it up. Right? No, I'm good for it. I'll pay you in 30, 40 days. Is that okay? Most of you would go, no, I kind of want you to give me the cash now. The moral of this story, folks, and it may sound weird to even talk about it, but we are an industry where we do that. We have bills that go to your customers, Publix or whoever, and then they say, we promise we'll pay you in 30, 40, 60, 90 days. Well, that's a promise. Do those folks always pay? Most of them do, but then we also have customers that don't pay. I much prefer having cash in my pocket than a promise. So if you remember nothing else, hopefully you remember lots of things, but remember, cash is king. What's another financial habit?
Pay your bills on time.
Pay your bills. Why, Darcy? Why should I pay my bills on time?
So that other people who are operating off of cash is king get paid and keep doing work for you.
Absolutely. You all broker all of your work to subcontractors for the most part. So we pay a lot of people out there And one of the things we don't want to have is the impression of being a deadbeat. You know, oh, you don't want to work for Benning, you know, they don't pay their bills on time. Trust me, about 50% of my client base is trade contractors, mechanical, electricals, concrete, you name it. And they all tell me who the bad contractors are out there. You don't want to work for, and I could list off 10 names right now, and the irony is all of you would go, oh yeah, they are bad contractors. We've heard the same things. It's funny, we're a little bit like, you know, that kind of the barber shop or, you know, the hair salon where everyone's kind of gossiping about one another. Well, that's what happens. If we don't pay our bills on time, we could easily be viewed as a source of bad debt. We want to keep our contractors working, paid, so they can meet their obligations. So pay our bills on time. What's another habit?
Don't carry debt.
Pay bills early.
Let me go to that one first because there's a great segue. Pay bills early so we can take advantage of discounts. You know, obviously there's always a weighing of that. You know, first of all, if I'm going to pay you early to take care of take a discount, we're going to talk a lot today about time value of money. For instance, $1 today is worth more than $1 30 days from now. You know, and that's all because of interest. You know, we hear about interest, whether it be your credit card, maybe your, if you have a mortgage payment or a car payment. Well, once again, we may do this, but we got to weigh and say, does it make sense to take the discount? Or do we want to just, you know, because we can play the market, so to speak. But that's a great one. At least make ourselves smart enough to know what's the right decision to make. You guys said something, or one of you said something.
Don't carry debt.
Don't carry debt. Now, that's a great point. There are a lot of organizations out there that are very laden with debt. Give me an example. What kind of debt could you possibly have in the construction business?
Equipment.
I don't know who said it, but so.
Equipment.
Equipment. We could go out and go to Caterpillar and buy tons of equipment, or Sunbelt, or whoever sells equipment these days. And I could go out and say, just like I go out and buy 5 new cars or 5 new Suburbans, well, unless I'm going to pay cash for it, I'm going to probably get some sort of a financing deal. So, good news is I have an asset, meaning the piece of equipment. On the other hand, I also have debt. So hopefully they're balancing out, but we also know there's things called depreciation. So 1 year, a piece of equipment can be worth X. The next year, it's worth much less. It's depreciating. Just like your car. You go out and buy a car, what do they often say when you go buy a car and you drive it off the lot? It's immediately worth, what, $10,000 less? Well, that's an example of depreciation. That's the same thing that happens in companies. So we have all this extra debt. What's another type of debt we could possibly have? So we buy equipment. What else?
Material.
Materials, we're buying it on credit. We go to Home Depot, Lowe's, some sort of maybe a construction warehouse, something along that line. So we're going to, probably use some sort of credit to do that. We want to pay our bills on time to where we don't have that extra interest. But that could be debt. What's another form of debt?
The building you operate out of.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't own the building we're sitting in right now, we got to pay rent. We got to pay a mortgage. We may own the building, once again, just like your house. The house is an asset, but you still got a mortgage payment. So once again, we could easily rack up a lot of debt very quickly if we're not being fiscally smart. That's another fancy word for good financial thinking. So why don't we want to have a lot of debt? I mean, heck, we got assets. What's the big deal? They offset one another, right? So why don't we want a lot of debt?
Cash flow.
Cash flow. Because what?
Cash is king.
Thank you. Cash is king. Absolutely. We, just like in your own personal life, you could go out there and rack up a lot of credit card debt. You could go out and buy a house, maybe that unfortunately you can't afford, or you have 4 cars. All of these things, the good news is you have the assets. The other side is you're also tied up because you immediately have to pay all that debt. So you end up with very little free cash flow, Meaning when you get your paycheck from bidding, what are you immediately doing? You're writing checks to other people, and pretty soon you're left with very little cash in your wallet or pocketbook. Then what do you end up having to do? Use more debt. And we start that wicked cycle going on. Now, all that being said, is all debt bad? Absolutely. The example I use, I went to Florida, and you might say, well, that was a bad investment, but for my Georgia fans sitting in the room. That being said, I went to Florida, I had a student loan. Now, you hear a lot of debate about student loans, but I will tell you, when I went to Florida, and my student loan was fairly cheap, and for that matter, I even kind of chuckle right now, because I think I came out of Florida with $10,000 student loan, which, not bad. I think I'd probably argue that that was good debt, because obviously that allowed me to do what I do now. On the other hand, let's say I'm a 21-year-old kid that just comes right out of Florida, and I get one of those credit card offers, to go out and use this credit card, and I go out and buy a big screen, a 68-inch plasma, but LCD TVs or LED TVs. Is that a good use of debt? So some would argue, well, is it football season? Or do you have an Xbox? Yeah, that might be a good investment. All that being said, that's not a good use of debt. So obviously, we do need some debt. So going out and buying those pieces of equipment help us put work in place, which helps generate revenue. My student loan helped me get a job, which helps me as a business person. Going out and buying the LCD TV, is that really a good use of my money? Probably not. So there is all kinds of debt out there. It doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. Additionally, we talk about credit worthiness. To some extent, having debt isn't a bad thing, but it allows you, and the illustration of being able to pay your bills on time allows you to have better credit. Does that make sense to everybody? For instance, you go out and get a car loan, they're going to run what's called a credit check. And they're going to look to see, do you have credit worthiness? Do you pay your bills on time? All the things we've talked about. As long as you don't have a lot of credit, but you exhibited that you know how to use credit, you'll get a bigger credit line or something along that line. Well, that's the same thing with Bennett. That's what Alden, one of the things he does is make sure we don't have too much debt, but enough debt to show that, we're in fact good stewards of our money. So we get, bonding capacity. Banks will want to lend us money if we needed it. If we wanted to build a 5th story on the building next door, we could do it and get a loan by having good credit. So what's another habit of great, financially minded contractors? Yes, sir.
I'd say to add on to that, like analysis of whether or not if you do go into debt or if you are taking on debt, that your assets that you gain from that are higher than your debt that you're taking on.
That's a great one. And we're going to talk a lot about this as we go through today. But one of the things, let me make sure this is dry erase. Yes. Okay, cool. Well, wasn't really what I was trying to do, but there's a formula we're going to talk about today a lot. I think that spelled it right. This is called part of the balance sheet. Your assets should equal your liabilities plus your equity. Some of you will hear that formula and it will be like me speaking like Charlie Brown's teacher. You'll be like, what did he say? I don't understand the words coming out of his mouth. Simply this, you have an asset that is equal to 2 components, one of which is the liability. A liability is something you owe. The equity is the wealth in that piece, or whatever we're talking about. To give you an example, I have a house, and I'll use a very simple example. Let's say my house is worth $250,000. That's what the house is worth. If I put it on the market today, put the big sign out in front, and said, for sale, $250,000. Piece of cake, right? However, we all know I probably don't have $250,000 to go out and buy that house. On the other hand, I will go to the bank, and the bank will lend me some money. They'll say, sure, Greg, why don't you put up some money, a little bit of cash, but we'll give you a loan for that. So, maybe they'll give me a loan for $200,000, but you'll notice this formula has to balance out, right? So, in this case, I got to come up with $50,000 of my own money, my equity. So I'll go to my checking account or savings account and cash in and say, okay, I'll put 50 grand of my own money up on it. This equation is the balance for everything we talk about in finance. And you could just do it in reverse, for instance. If I wanted to sell my house, you hear this all the time, how much equity do you have in that house? If you own a car, and you go, well, the car is worth $10,000, but I owe $15,000. What do we call that?
Upside down.
Upside down. Well, upside down is saying I owe more than this car is worth. That's not a good thing. That's always going to happen in a lot of cases when you buy assets. There will eventually, hopefully, come a point when you are right side up, meaning you still keep making payments, and you're able to pay down, and then you owe nothing, but there's probably very little residual value left at that point in time. This is why it sounds like a great idea. I got to go out and buy a car, for instance, and they give you terms. Some of those terms may be things like a 3-year, you put in $1,000, but 3 years, no interest or whatever. Well, that might be good. Why would I not necessarily want a 6-year term for all my car payments?
More interest.
I'm going to pay more interest, but also getting made right side up may never come about, or it's going to be much longer because the car company is going to get their money way sooner. So you pay all that interest in the upfront, you're never actually made whole till about year 6 or year 7. So the moral of the story is, this concept of this balancing act, as we say, we're going to continue to look at and say, assets are good. And yes, we do have debt here, but as long as we have some sort of equity, and as we go through this, the same thing can be said for Benning. For instance, we have assets here at Benning. Give me an example of an asset at Benning.
This building.
This building's one of them, absolutely. I'm assuming you all own it. That could be it. I don't know how you do your vehicles, for instance, but if you own your vehicles, that's an example. We also have this neat thing called cash in the bank. If we asked Alden right now and we said, hey, how much cash are we sitting on right now? He would tell us a number. It would probably be a pretty sizable number. That doesn't mean we could go today with an ATM card and put in the Benning PIN number and say, let me withdraw $10 million worth of cash. Why can't you do that? Why can't you do that?
They got withdrawal limits.
Well, that too. Yeah. You got the big bag and the money's just coming in. Who wants you to keep that money in the bank? The bank wants you to. There are also institutions out there. Your customers want to know that you can meet obligations. Bonding companies, insurance companies. If you withdraw all the money out of your bank, for instance, if you don't put this money up here, do you think the bank gets a little worried? Because they're absorbing all the risk. They're like, wait a second, you want to buy this $250,000 house, but you're not willing to put any skin in the game? That seems a little fishy to me. Well, it's the same thing. The bank and all these institutions want to know that you have some skin in the game. So we have cash in our business. We also have these things we'll talk a lot about today, accounts receivable. What is accounts receivable? Money owed to us. So we are going to receive that money at some point in time. That's good stuff. On the other hand, we have a thing called accounts payable. What is an account payable? We got to pay people. So accounts receivables right here, accounts payable is here. And once again, the difference, what the business is worth. For instance, you'll hear words like book value. What is bedding worth? If you were to put a for sale sign out in front and say, bedding's for sale, yeah, that's pretty far-fetched, and we're not talking about the building, we're talking about the business, there would be an inherent worth, and we call that book value. Folks, all of this, whether it's bedding, your personal bank account, the stocks you buy on Wall Street, or your 401k, or whatever it is, all fit this formula right here. This is universal. So I'm going to use a lot of those personal examples to kind of illustrate it, but it 100% transcends everything we're talking about. I want you to write a number down for me right now. Not a number, I'm going to tell you what number. The net profit margin of a business like bedding. Some of you, we've talked about this before, but we're going to do a little pop quiz. Net profit margin as a percentage of a business like bedding. Just write that number down. Put it anywhere on your page, should just take a second. As a percentage. What's up? You good? So, now, here's the question. How many of you said 50 to 75%? Raise your hand. Okay. 40 to 50%. 30 to 40%. Where did I leave off? 20 to 30%. 15 to 20%. 10 to 15%. 5 to 10%. 3 to 4%. You notice how I got really hyper accurate there. The actual number is somewhere between 2 to 4%. So, if you flip the page, you'll notice I have this little sketch up here. For every dollar that comes into bedding, we have to now subdivide it out. So for instance, I got to pay for materials, equipment, subs, of which is probably a lot, labor. Those are called direct costs. And look how much in terms of contract costs we have. About 90% plus or minus. So for every dollar that comes in, 90% goes right back out the door. Then we have this neat thing called overhead. What's overhead?
What you see in this room?
Yeah, could be it's all of us, or just looking at this room, or look at this guy in this room. I'm overhead, I get it. But those are the things that allow us to keep the doors open. Whether or not we have any projects or not, this overhead piece has to be paid. For instance, your house would be considered overhead. Whether or not you get a paycheck from bedding, you still got to pay your mortgage payment. Whether or not your bank would be okay with it or not is another story, but you can say, I don't have my job, I don't have any money coming in. They go, you still got to make your overhead payments. So we got to keep the lights on, we got to pay accounting, we got to pay all of us. We are overhead. Now we get to keep, out of that $1 coming in the business, you get to keep 2 to 4 pennies. 2 to 4 pennies. Does that sound like a good business?
Depends on the volume.
What's that?
Depends on the volume.
Exactly. This is a volume game, there's no question. However, I have plenty of clients that do a lot of volume but still make no money. And it comes down to how they manage the work. The moral of the story here is this a good financial business to be in construction? The answer is most people would say, wow, That's a shocking number. Not that it's not a good business to be in, but do we take a lot of risk in this business?
Yes.
We take a lot of bodily risk, financial risk, safety risk, all of these things. A lot of things could go wrong. You often hear in this industry, we use the phrase, contractors are one mistake away from bankruptcy. Why do you think we use that phrase, one mistake away? You make one mistake, there's no margin for error there. We could easily vaporize that 2 to 4%, easily. So my point is, we take a lot of risk, the reward isn't always there. So when we think about this, now here's a little pop quiz for you. You guys raised your hand at different points when I went down that line. I've actually had one group where I asked them, I said, 60 to 70%, 5 people in the room raised their hand. They thought that business made that amount of money, 60 to 70%. And I said, okay, let's be clear, this is net, right? You understand what net is. It's after overhead and all that things. I was like, wow. Now, here's the thing, that's not picking on anybody. If you don't know what you don't know, it's called ignorance. You have that. My point is, if you went out today and walked up to one of maybe your laborers and asked them that question, if you walked up to one of your trade partners that works for bedding, what kind of number you think you'd hear? You'd be surprised. Oh yeah, there's this, oh man. And to show it doesn't matter, and it's not picking on our laborers or our carpenters or anything like that. I actually had an ops manager. He was the number 2 person in charge of this company. They did, I believe it was $60 million. $60 million because it works out the math here. And the number 2 guy, him and I were sitting in a room, and I said, you guys got a great business here, man. This is good stuff. He goes, yeah, I think the old man's probably making about $40 million a year. And I kind of sat there, and I was like, no, he's not making $40 million a year. Oh yeah, look at all the equipment we got, man. The old man's driving a new car. He's got a boat, and he flies first class everywhere. I'm like, no. Point is, he thought they were making roughly, 66% profit. The number 2 guy in the company thought that, when in reality, it's 2 to 3%. So, I want you to think at your table, because obviously a lot of what we do falls in that direct cost column. It's the labor, material, equipment, and subs. As whatever you are in the company, estimator, project manager, superintendent, administrative, whoever you are in this group right now, how could you influence these? So you might say, well, it is what it is, those are costs. I want you to work at your table and list out all the ways that we could efficiently manage these elements. And don't just say work harder, because it ain't about, you guys work hard enough. How do we work smarter? So work at your group to figure out what are some of those things that we can do in each one of those categories to, in fact, become more efficient, manage money better, manage that equation. All right? Go to it.